they found an old wood cutting, these people playing cornets and sagbutts and horses for the front and the bridge road and stuff like that. And the funniest thing was he had like 20 of them printed up. It was half of an 8.5 by 11, you fold in half. I look and I says, Tom, I says, you know, on the wood cutting, the horses have crapped in the street that's showing crap. And he just said, oh my God. I said, don't worry about it. Keep it. This is good.
Hello and welcome to episode 64 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of June 30th, 2025. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including a series of firsts for Florida A&M, a commemoration of a date in film history, some thoughts about a summer band director event, and I have an antiphonal conversation. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. This episode has everything. An entertaining interview, an actual good news story, a preview of next week's New England Band Directors Institute, a name that I had to practice pronouncing. Well, it's got almost everything. There's no impassioned rant this time out. You will perhaps be relieved to know this. So, place your valve oil and reed orders, and away we go. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Tallahassee, Florida. Credit on this story to the reporting of Vaughn Wilson of the online outlet HBCU Game Day. Oluwamodupe Oloyede has been named as the head drum major for the 2025 Florida A&M University Marching 100. Previously, Oloyede served as just the second female drum major in the band's history. A saxophonist, Oloyede first served as a drum major at Southwest DeKalb High School in Decatur, Georgia. DeKalb is one of the Marching 100's largest feeder band programs. The Marching 100's community of former drum majors has voiced its support. One of those former drum majors, Victor Gaines, said, quote, "In a time when qualifications are questioned, Dupe has earned her spot. She's focused, inspiring to young girls, and backed by those who came before her." For the first time in the history of the Marching 100, its top three student leadership positions, head drum major, band president, and assistant to the band director, will all be held by women. Dateline, Greenwich, Connecticut. Credit on this story to the reporting and writing of Richard Kaufman of Patch.com. Dressed in concert attire, more than a dozen Greenwich High School students spoke out at a mid-June Board of Education meeting, urging the school district to reconsider a staffing change that would have sent Greenwich band director Michael Breaux to a different school next year. Breaux was set to be transferred to a middle school position because of lower enrollment and fewer music class requests, according to school district officials. The students who spoke during the June 12th meeting said Breaux's departure would drastically impact the Greenwich High School music program, which they say was already hurt during and since the COVID-19 pandemic. They emphasized Breaux's positive impact on students' lives, calling him the most sturdy pillar of the GHS community. Miller Fishback, a junior, addressed the impact on staffing, saying, quote, "We've been told over and over that this is simply a logistical shuffle, that this is just something that happens in large school districts, but that logic doesn't apply in this case. This loss means canceling new and innovative classes like modern band. It means combining jazz ensembles and reducing opportunities for students. It means overloading the remaining teachers and undercutting any momentum that's finally being built after years of COVID disruption. That context matters," unquote. Greenwich's superintendent of schools, Dr. Tony Jones, said she would reconsider the move. The day after the meeting, she sent a letter to district families informing them that Breaux would remain at the high school after all. In that letter, Jones said that the Greenwich School Administration had been working on next year's master schedule based on student pre-enrollment numbers. While that effort was inspired by the need to be fiscally responsible, quote, "There were some missing pieces which needed to be considered. What really resonated with me was the social and emotional aspect for how our students were being impacted. It was obvious to me it was not just the music." Of the students who spoke on behalf of their band director, Jones wrote, quote, "They were extremely respectful and thoughtful. They were the perfect example for all of us as adults of what true advocacy can look like. Personally, after they all finished speaking, I was so inspired for the next generation of leaders. And that's news and notes from the band world. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick break. Meet you on the other side, I hope. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this episode's second strain, an acknowledgement of a date which happened earlier this month. Today in history. I'm reminded by the internets, which may be relied upon to remind us of important milestones like this, but may also be relied upon to utterly downplay other slightly more earth-shaking anniversaries. Where was I? Oh yes, I'm reminded of the 40th anniversary of a major moment in American cinematic culture. That date has been disputed by other internet culture scholars, because of course it has, but for this moment, let's pretend that the online world is in complete unison on this one. I know, I said let's pretend. June 5th, 1985 is agreed upon, for our purposes, as the date upon which the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off occurred. According to at least one online article, we know this, thanks to a stunningly in-depth investigation by baseballprospectus.com, which in 2011 managed to track down the exact baseball game that the movie's main characters, Ferris, Sloan, and Cameron, were watching at Chicago's Wrigley Field. It was the Chicago Cubs against the Atlanta Braves. This investigation involved analysis of who was on the field and how they fared in each inning. Now, if you're a member of a particular group of former collegiate musicians from those mid-1980s, this story probably reminds you of two specific people. One was the noted director of a noted college marching band who, shall we say, had an eye for great ways to make his band seem cool. Attuned in a unique way to trending pop culture phenomena, long before anyone used trending as a verb form, George Parks had already established a knack for putting music in front of his UMass band that translated into instant audience recognition. Themes from the Superman and Rocky movies, Earth, Wind & Fire's Let's Groove, the Frank Sinatra cover of New York, New York, just por ejemplo, prior to fall of 1986. And in the years that followed, UMass football crowds saw drum majors portraying Batman and the Joker, mere moments after Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson's movie hit the theaters. They heard the Phantom of the Opera demand of Christine, who was played by a nice lady from the color guard who was genuinely named Christine, make your choice. They saw Jack Sparrow hijack the drum major podium for the closing chords of a Pirates of the Caribbean show. And they heard an 8-year-old girl sing with a backup band of nearly 300. That's just to name a few. Mr. Parks knew it wasn't just familiar music that would win the day, although that surely was the core of the show. He knew that planning something visual, something unusual, something singularly memorable was crucial. So, fall of 1986. It wasn't that Twist and Shout was a new tune. The Beatles had covered it 2 decades prior, and it wasn't that the music was especially riveting, other than being catchy and danceable, although the band's then graduate assistant and musical arranger Michael Klesch captured the best elements of the Beatles' vocals with his wind arrangement. It was that there were new toys to be played with. No, more accurately, there were new toys to be employed in the master plan. That season, the era of using megaphones to amplify the director's voice during rehearsals had ended. The new technology was a set of loudspeakers that were fed a signal from a wireless microphone. No matter where the instructor was, high up on the viewing tower, down on the sideline, somewhere else on the field, her or his voice always came from the intersection of the front sideline and each 30-yard line. Perfectly audible. This occasionally caused humorous rehearsal moments. Turn and face me, please. Where are you? It also allowed him to reproduce a particular iconic movie scene very faithfully. It's so iconic that when I recently typed in the YouTube search box the letters F-E-R, what came up in the first 10 search possibilities was Ferris Bueller Twist and Shout. It makes sense. In Ferris Bueller, during his day off, Matthew Broderick ascended a Chicago parade float and hijacked a dancing marching band's performance of Twist and Shout, lip-syncing the song into an unplugged microphone to the astonished delight of the parade spectators and to the consternation of his school friends, ably portrayed by actors Mia Sara and Alan Ruck. Therefore, on the field at UMass in the fall of 1986, a member of the pit, whose skill set definitely included lead vocalizing, and who looked more than enough like Matthew Broderick to pass in a crowd, hijacked a dancing marching band's performance of Twist and Shout, but he actually sang the song, to the delight of football audiences. About the only thing we didn't include as part of that tune were two band members portraying the Sarah and Ruck characters, now that I think of it, and the dancing Oktoberfest girls, but I digress. If you are a member of that particular group of former collegiate musicians from those mid-1980s, this person is the second of those specific people of whom you are probably reminded. This percussionist fellow didn't just strut around on the sideline. He was not tethered by a microphone cord. He was set free to roam the grounds through the magic of wireless technology. Hey, this was the mid-1980s. Wireless amplification was a big deal. And so was our singer. He skipped and bounded along the sideline, off the sideline, past the restraining fence between the field and the stands, up into the stadium seats, singing and dancing and high-fiving, which itself was also a fairly new and exciting invention at the time, and he was clearly enjoying the hell out of himself and the experience. You couldn't watch him do his thing and not grin. Unless you were playing a wind instrument, in which case grinning made playing tougher. But whatever stressful things may have been going on in his life, in the 2 minutes it took to perform the tune, our vocalist clearly had set them aside, and nothing else mattered in the world, other than having a blast singing and making sure everyone anywhere near him was having a blast watching him do it. It was as if the crowd turned into one gigantic colon and closed parenthesis long before emoticons were invented. You couldn't help but smile. Whenever the band's introduction to the tune began, he would don the wireless headset, point at the crowd, and call out, "How y'all doing?" Same call, every single time. And the audience was always doing great and let him and us know it. In our more fatigued moments as college band people, the phrase might have been spoken with just a touch of gentle mockery. Yeah, we've played this thing nearly enough times now that "how y'all doing" is starting to be cliché. But when push came to shove, when it was showtime, and when we had to be honest with ourselves, it was perfectly indicative of our band's personality. You're going to love us, whether you like it or not. It's of zero surprise to me or anyone else I know from those days that this gentleman is still doing this sort of thing for a living. Seems to me he was designed from the get-go to front a band, preferably a Jimmy Buffett-style band, but whatever. On the first fall 1986 Saturday that we put Twist and Shout out there, in front of a live audience, I would say I learned a little something about stage presence, bravado, reckless abandon, and sheer joie de vivre from him. In fact, in the fall of 1987, the band played Twist and Shout again. Well, it was a crowd favorite, so why not? And as one of the drum majors, I was tasked with conducting it. During our pregame performance on the road at the University of Delaware, after cueing the final fermata chord, I turned around to the audience, both arms flung in the air so as to say to the crowd, "You're going to love us with the..." and nearly injured our vocalist guy. I didn't realize he'd climbed up onto the conducting podium for the last few bars of the tune. He was standing right behind me. I caught him high on the shoulder, nearly knocked him clean off the box. Oops, sorry about that, Chief. But that whirl and yay of mine had not been previously wired into my personality or my performance, like at all. And what did I, that formerly shy person, blame for that personality adjustment? Well, hanging around that particular band director, of course. Hard not to pick up on the enthusiasm and such. But also, I am very willing to admit, it came from working hard to rise to our vocalist's level of performance. So, Dave Soroff, how are y'all doing? All right, we'll take another quick break, and on the other side of that, I'll chat with a gentleman who also does not lack for personality. Hope you'll stick around. Time now for the trio section, and it's a hoot. Here are a couple of things that it will be helpful for you to know going in. 1. My guest and I were recording on one of the ferociously heat-wave-laden days of this past week, and both he and I were recording from rooms that had fans going. Otherwise, we were probably going to die, which is not approved. So, in post-production, I brought all my audio editing skills and software to bear on this challenge, and I managed to get a remarkable amount of background noise excised from each of our audio tracks, but you're still going to hear an imperfect sound canvas, shall we say. A little bit of audio noise artifact here, a little bit of the rumbly sound of the equipment that the landscapers across the street were using to do their work there. Poor fellas. But you'll definitely get the idea. The second thing it's good to know is that even though we managed not to properly identify it by name right away, the group that my guest is talking about, as he describes his role in it, is a community brass band based in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, down along the South Shore, halfway between Boston and Rhode Island, called the Bridgewater Antiphonal Brass Society. And a little tiny detail about that group is that its other co-founder is a gentleman well known in the Massachusetts music education community, namely the great Dr. Tom Reynolds. You are now properly prepared for what you're about to hear. Or maybe you're not. Anyway, now then, let's modulate and get into the trio section. In this episode's trio section, I'm pleased to be joined by a gentleman who I would judge is certainly among Massachusetts' longest-serving current band directors. My introduction to him came when I joined his brass band for a parade a couple of years ago, even though I play the saxophone. And we will unravel that seeming contradiction shortly, I do promise. Please help me welcome to the program, Mike Palmieri. Michael.
Good morning, Rob.
I am, of course, very pleased that you carved away a moment to chat with me here. As I so often do with my fine trio section guests, I'm going to use a set of biographical sketch kind of questions to introduce you to my listenership. Now, I ask these questions, and usually I know the answer, but every so often I am wrong. What's your primary instrument?
My primary instrument, and the one I studied in school with, was trombone.
See, I told you I got it wrong.
Well, as a kid, I started on trumpet, and gradually, when we got into junior high and high school, I migrated to euphonium and then trombone. It was a case of they had an instrument available and they needed a player. Okay, I'll try this. And that's how that started. We had a good director, Walter Lewis, who was, again, back then was as dedicated as you. And Tom Reynolds reminds me of that. Someone who was that dedicated to his students. And he was always willing to take that time to help someone and teach them individually, even though it wasn't giving lessons, it was just helping you to get going and whatnot. And of course, if the band needed something and then he thought someone would be interested, and you kind of volunteered, and once you did that, he realized, okay, here's someone who wants to do that. And he was just a good guy.
So what bands have you been active with in your life, whether it's playing or conducting, and you can start at any early time you like?
I filled in with the South Shore or Southeastern Orchestra that's out of Weymouth. They used to call me once in a while because I knew people who played with them, and sometimes they get stuck for a trumpet player. I would come and fill in. I haven't done that in a long time, but I played in the Brockton Symphony, played trombone for about 4 or 5 years, way back during the early 90s or late 80s. I don't remember. That gets worse and worse. Everybody's told me this. When you get older, there's 2 things that go. And I said, what's that? I said, well, one of them is your memory, and I can't think of what the other one is. Yeah. That's the old. So it's. What was interesting was Ron Knudsen was the conductor. And I learned things from him, things that he would say, stuff that he would say to the brass players. Some of it you completely ignored because there are times he had no idea what he was talking about, as most trombone players would say. And there were a lot of times that little things that would stick with you, that particularly what he'd say to the trumpets or the horns. So you learn stuff. You learn stuff everywhere you go. What was interesting was some years later, and I'd say maybe 10 years ago, we were filling in to perform a concert in Wellesley for their celebration that they have the Memorial Day parade a week before Memorial Day weekend. Royal Switzer is the fellow who put that together. I don't know if he's still involved. And he called me that week coming up to the parade and says, Mike, are you guys doing anything the night of the parade? And I said, no, we just come in. We were doing the Wellesley Parade at the time. He says, why? He says, well, the band that's supposed to play at the fireworks can't make it. So we finally came together with a figure because he had someone in the town who would pay for that concert. And he used to hire a top 40 rock and roll band to do it. So while we were there during the break, he introduced me to Max Hobart. Max Hobart was one of the violinists in the symphony. And for a while, he was the concertmaster for the Pops. So we got to talking, and then he says, you look familiar. And I says, yeah, you played down in Brockton when we do the concerts. And he goes, yeah, Ron was there. And I played all over the place. I mean, people would call me that knew me to play up on the North Shore for different things, small bands and stuff. But one of the things that happened was a friend of mine who played with a tuba player who played with a banjo band asked me, and it turned out a clarinet player that he knew that I had become friends with too, also would play with them. And they said, we want to have like a Dixieland band to play with the banjo band. So when we made arrangements to go do a rehearsal, I was trying to get a trumpet player. And the trumpet player that I tried to get, for some reason that day, that night, couldn't make it. And I couldn't find anyone, but I knew a trombone player that probably could play it. So I got him, and I played cornet. And I was playing cornet after that, doing that stuff, and then eventually ended up in a Dixieland band playing, and did that for a long time. And we were all over Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut. That was a lot of fun. We did a lot of playing. I found a company that was doing the fundraisers for firemen and police departments using softball games. They would go out and sell advertising. And so when we hooked up with them and I talked to them, they said this would be great. After the first one we did, the first softball game, they would get Bruins players, ex-Red Sox players, some Patriot players to come in and play against those local fire and police departments. And would play between the innings, would play before the game. Renee Rancourt used to come and sing the national anthem. And because there were a couple of hockey players there, because I don't think there were any French Canadians attending these games, he would sing "Oh Canada."
Yeah.
So, and we had a lot of fun with him because he ended up, some of the songs we would do, he said, well, I know the words. I said, yeah, come on, let's sing. So he'd sing. What was funny was that we used to play hello, 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 what a wonderful word. And we would sing that. Well, Renee Rancourt came to me once and said, he says, you know something? He says, you go in the locker room when the Bruins are playing. He says, and before the game, he says, they'd be singing hello, hello, because they didn't remember the words. Because the few guys who were playing with this were still playing with, who did some of the games. They had a couple of the younger players. They would go back and tell the other guys. And so it was a lot of laughs. We got a kick out of stuff like that. So we ended up all over it, but we did play, and this is interesting because of what's going on with Caitlin Clark. This had to be during the 90s, early 90s. We were playing for a basketball game up in the middle of Massachusetts, and whatever it was, the firemen and police had planned. So they had the Harlem Magicians, not the Harlem Globetrotters, who were based out of Connecticut, by the way, and they would play the games, and they had a couple. Marcus Haynes was still playing with them. And I remember when we're going in, setting up in the gym, there was a gal out there in the basketball court, very tall, shooting 30-footers, just firing away. Turns out it was a girl named Tracy Liss, who had set all these records back a few years before that down at UConn. And I'm watching the stuff with Caitlin Clark. And said, this is what this girl used to do. She would have been, if they had a WNBA that was playing back then, it would have been interesting. So the magician showed up because they trained her. She got to work on the routines, and they were watching her fire those things in, and they were amazed. And it was just to see that. It's just one of the things that I won't forget.
My experience with bands has been twofold. One, just the activity is great, but also you get to see the darndest things.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I would have never been there to see something like that.
Which sort of leads me to the question I usually ask last in that pack of opening questions, and I know the answer to it. At least I know one of the answers to it. What is your current band-related role?
Besides directing the group, I more or less run the group. I take care of all of the organizational things. It's been tough to get people who want to actually take the time to do it. I don't think they realize what goes on with doing the concerts, besides being the one that makes sure that all equipment is there and what gets set up and things for the concerts, but also to make sure we've got the right personnel, because we go with a set instrumentation with the brass ensemble. 7 trumpets, 3 or 4 horns, 3 euphoniums, 4 trombones, 1 or 2 tubas, and then percussion, depending on who's available. Not everybody, and this I've always understood, not everybody who plays with the group, who rehearses with the group, can play every concert. People have their lives to live. There's all kinds of things that happen and stuff that happens the day before. So you got to kind of handle that and not bang your head against a wall. And hopefully you've got enough people that you know that maybe you can get someone to come in. That sometimes it creates issues, but what are you going to do? It's part of the deal.
It's how I snuck into the group for a couple of parades.
Well, and that's what's nice. Well, and here's another one. Irv Shine used to direct the first Corps cadet band in Brookline. He's passed away. And I met him when I was playing with the Roma band. A friend of mine who had been playing with the Roma band got me to play. I played trombone with him and euphonium. And this was during the 80s into the early 90s, probably for about 5 or 6 years. And it got to the point where we were doing so much I couldn't, and we too many competing dates that we were doing that I couldn't play. And also I saw the feasts changing, where they were gradually less and less. We used to do the concerts at those feasts at night, and that was the best part about playing, getting to play all the old pieces, all the old opera pieces, all kinds of stuff that they would do, and then just play. There was so much that you didn't have to have any music for. They'd just, either the clarinet player would start to play a polka, a mazurka, whatever, and within 2 bars, the rest of the band was playing. And I got to know a lot of the people who play for the Air Force Guard Band out of the North Shore, because there was about half a dozen of them that were playing with the Roma band. And that's the thing. You get to know people from all over. I got friends that go back 50 years, 60 years almost, who I met playing. They're still friends, and particularly the students and stuff that have played with us from the different schools.
Band family trees are fun to diagram.
Band kids. Like all other people, I got band kids. You can tell.
Related to that, I have a couple of questions which I'm going to get to, but I think I want to go to this one first to kind of get fully into this. The Bridgewater Antiphonal Brass Society. The name. I have mentioned the name of the group to quite a number of people since I first came on board with you, and the name stops people in their tracks, quite honestly. What they say, antiphonal, what do they do?
We're against music. That's all there is to it. I'll put in another story after I say it. Tom Reynolds contacted me. I was a senior in high school. He's a junior in high school in East Bridgewater, contiguous towns. And they were also our sports rivalry, that town. It was funny. And John Schuler was the director. There's another side story to that. Mm-hmm. And he called me up and he says, Walter Lewis gave me your name. I said, okay. So he told me who he was. He says, you think it'd be possible to get together some of the musicians from the bands from the 2 towns together to play? All right, I could try it. Of course, you got to remember this back then, all you had was landlines, and we even had a party line back there. Back then, I can remember that. So we didn't contact as many people. And we got together maybe a dozen people between the 2 of us. And he had a place that was the Beaverbrook Beagle Club. It was down the street from his house in East Bridgewater. They were like a rod and gun club. And we were able to go there and rehearse. They had taken some music from high school band room. And we did a couple of things. But that's how I got to know Tom. Even the first couple of years out of high school, when I was at Northeastern, I was actually arranging for pit bands for the CYO shows that the church was doing. Mm. And how I learned to transpose was I'd play a note on my trumpet and ask the alto sax player, what note is that for you? Yeah. I mean, that's how I... Yep. So Tom played, and he got a couple of people he knew to film. Nobody got paid for that. We just did it as a volunteer thing. And we did that for a couple of years, and the fellow who was the director for the church he used to be their organist, a guy named Bob Diaz. He came, and he actually played piano for one of those shows, and he came to me, he says, do you think you could get some of the brass people together to do Christmas Eve here at St. Anne's in West Bridgewater? Okay, I'll ask. I said, what are we going to play? He says, well, I'll tell you, I'll give you the things for the hymns that they're going to do, the Christmas carols. and one of the Bach pieces. He says, can you arrange it for that? I got 4 trumpets, 2 trombones, baritone, horn. That's what we had. And I wrote the arrangements for that. We played that. We did that for a couple of years. And finally, when he asked me the last year, I says, Bob, I says, go ask him to see if you can get any money for the group. And he goes, well, they're not going to pay you for anything. I says, then we're not doing it. I had to learn that the hard way. Mm-hmm. So I stopped that. But meantime, I was doing other playing. I was playing with a rock and roll band. I had 2 trumpets, 2 trombones, alto and tenor sax playing with a rock and roll band. There were 2 guys, trumpet player and the keyboard player, both from Whitman, who were playing, who had just finished their freshman year at Berkeley. And when we were rehearsing, and if they came up with something where they wanted to change things, I'll never forget one of them going, oh, we got to give this C to the alto sax. And before he could I says, it's A. And he goes, how'd you know that? I says, because I know that. Because I learned by that. Yeah. So as we talked more, the piano player convinced me, because I was at Northeastern at the time. I arranged a time that I had some time during the day between classes. I went over and he took me and we went to some of his classes and ensembles over at Berkeley. And he says, yeah, you should consider coming here. He says, if you do stuff like that, you don't have that problem. That next fall, I was at Berkeley. But I could only go 1 semester because I still had loans from Northeastern. So I would just work 12 months until I had enough money to go back for a semester. And I did that for 3 years till they told me, they said, well, you know what? You're in music ed. If you're going to come, you got to be coming fall, spring, so that you can do your student observation, do student teaching. But as things worked out, I was able to get a Pell Grant, which actually covered 1 semester. So I was able to do that. I had to take out another loan. I actually borrowed against my insurance policy.
Do what you got to do.
And at the same time, the brass ensemble was starting to get a little bit bigger. We were playing in schools, churches. We got to the point where we had 12, 13, 14 people playing. And then it finally got to the point where doing some outdoor concerts, we couldn't be just playing antiphonal music, Baroque and classical things. So we had to come up with other stuff. The antiphonal stuff we did get to do in some of the churches and some of the concerts where we would have choirs in different parts of the church. And it was such a different sound for people to hear, particularly in a church that was big enough and had a nice reverb to it. But it was tough conducting because you don't realize that time lapse when you're conducting. And I told them, don't listen, just watch me. Yeah. If you listen, you're going to hesitate. It was interesting. It was a lot of fun. But that's how that, and of course, Tom went to New England. So in the beginning, he was copying music from, give the stuff to take it out from me, and I'd go get it copied. And then finally, he told me about the Robert King Company, and I went over there. And again, this is back during the 70s. Robert King Company in Easton. He had it was like a bulkhead door on the side of this old single-story storefront, couple stores in center of Easton, and they had the basement. And the only sign there was this little brass plate that said music for brass. I walked by it 3 times. I couldn't figure it. Finally, I looked, what the hell's this? So I went downstairs and I knocked at the door. They opened the door. One of the Corleys who conducted the MIT band for years, his brother, who also went to work for Carl Fisher after that, was working for Bob King. And he's the one who met me at the door. So I told him what we were looking and what type of instrumentation. And he's pulling stuff out from all over the place, all these racks and filing cabinets. And I go like this. I says, why are you taking all that music out? He goes, well, so you to look through. I says, I'm not buying all this stuff. And he goes, I don't expect you to. I says, okay. I says, I only came here with, I forgot how much gas I had. So it was funny. It was one of the pieces when I realized you could buy just the score. Okay, I'll do that. I'll write out the parts. It'll save me $3. And I'll never forget that day after I left went home, I'm writing out the thing and I realized the middle pages of the score were missing. I said, so I figured, all right, it's still morning. I don't know how much they're open on a Saturday. This was a Saturday because I was working at the time. So I went down there. I knock at the door. Corley opens the door and he says, you've been here before. You don't have to knock anymore. I mean, that started. I got to meet Bob King, and then I used to go there on a Saturday in the afternoon after they were closed because there was a back door. And he drove a 1958, 59 Mercedes 220 SE. And I knew that car. So when I see his car there, I'd go to the back door and it was unlocked, walk in, and I'd hear him from the other side of the basement. There's only one person who would come in here on a Saturday when we're closed. That's you, Mike? I says, yeah, why? He says, what's the matter? But the conversations I had with him, he used to be a big supporter of the Boston Symphony. He used to have Armando Catala, Roger Voisin used to come down with him and a couple of guys. He would transcribe stuff and they would come down to play it. He'd come up with a couple of places. These are the people that were playing with him and that he got to know. I think it's one of the trumpet chairs is the Robert King chair because he donated $1 million. Bob King had an unbelievable business. He had no phone there. You couldn't call that company up to order. You would order stuff by mail or you showed up and went in there. And I felt bad for him because during the middle 70s, when the bicentennial was taking place, he had written to every major composer, whether they were brass or big people in the United States. He says, nobody responded. I told him to commission a piece to write something for brass. Instead, he said, I got people from England getting in touch with me. Arthur Bliss, Ronald Jacobs. They wrote pieces for it specifically. And you could see the expression on his face because it hurt him to say that. He says, here I am going to commission a piece, and they're Americans.
Well, the English do have a history with brass bands, after all.
Which I learned, I didn't know back then. In fact, he gave me a bunch of stuff he says, I can't sell this stuff. He says, no one wants to buy British brass band stuff. Here, take this stuff. And I'm looking at him, I says, what am I going to do? It's E-flat horns.
Yeah.
He goes, just tell them to transpose. I says, is it going to sound a little different? Because I knew the alto horns that used. I drove the horn players crazy. It was a lot of fun, interesting. The time I got to spend and talk to him, the stuff he'd tell me.
So does the Antiphonal Brass Society play actual British brass band arrangements?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
There's another thing I found out. There was a guy down at the University of North Carolina, a guy named Purdy. He was a professor of music. Him and his wife, when the British brass band started to become something during the late 80s, early 90s in this country, and they started to have competitions, and he started carrying a lot of their publications to distribute. And I called him up. Nice guy, just nicest people. They reminded me of Bob King in some respects. I told him what we were doing. I says, we got to find pop stuff and whatnot for the band to play. I says, and it's expensive to go out and buy, unless I just buy the score of like a concert band arrangement. I says, and then I'm going to write out parts and figure out what to do, which I did. I transcribe once in a while some things. So he told me, and he says, look, he says, I'm going to send you in the mail. He sent me what they had for a catalog. So now I'll mark some of the stuff up, particularly the composers, arrangers that you should look at that write really good stuff. He says, and it may be that you won't have any issue having it done for with the French horns playing the alto parts. The British like to use the euphoniums to try to get that French horn sound. The British baritones are a cylindrical bore instrument that sound they used to write a lot along with the trombones. And of course, the trombone 1 and trombone 2 parts are treble clef. It's like a baritone horn. The only bass clef part in the whole thing is a third trombone part. The tubas are written in B flat, but they're written in treble clef, both the E flat tuba and the B flat tuba. So that was interesting. What he did, they were going through, and he had a couple of guys working for him. They would write out the trombone parts in bass clef and a tuba in bass clef so that people were more up to buy it to try to play it without being, and particularly with American bands playing it, most of those people don't play treble clef and those things. So I did. And of course, whenever he was having a sale, I'd pick up 2 or 3 pieces and would adapt them wherever we had to make them sound good. And they're still not, we still use some of them. They're just really nice arrangements. The last 10 years or so, I finally said, I can't be spending that type of money. So I ended up doing more arranging for us to do pop tunes and whatnot. And they came out all right. They're good enough for us to play, and the audiences like them.
Does the band have regular gigs that it does absolutely all the time, and like some organization will expect you every year?
Well, as it turns out, and this didn't happen till the church where we rehearse, this goes back probably more than 10 years now that I think of it, which actually was the church, the minister that officiated at my wife's wedding. We ended up rehearsing there. He asked if we'd do a Christmas concert. okay. I says, when? So when he told me, I said, okay. I says, this works because it was like the third week in December. And he told me and asked me in November. I says, because we only rehearse every other Sunday. We stopped rehearsing every Sunday a long time ago because I get to the point where this is crazy. It ties me up every Sunday. And instead of doing that to the people, now it makes it better for them. In fact, I've got a couple who are nurses. One of them is retired, an EMT, actually 3 nurses, firemen. And so they'd let me know their schedules. And sometimes they'd say, okay, I'd try to coordinate with them and would get it so that the majority of them could make the rehearsals. And then the other ones once in a while would get the day off or something and switch with someone. So we did the concert, and one of the women came up to us, this is Raynham, and she told me who he was. And she was a member of the church. And she says, do you guys do parades? I said, we do it at the time. We've been doing the Nahat parade for a long time. We used to do Lynn too, Nahat and Lynn. And then we weren't doing another parade on Memorial Day. We were just doing the Dedham Flag Day parade. One of the fellows who plays with us, who's been playing with us for 30, 40 years, he went to Berkeley. And I remember him at Berkeley, but we were different years. I can remember talking with, bumping into him and stuff. Nice guy, Henry Platt, who taught up in Wellesley. He was the director of music. He says, hey, listen. He says, one of the parents came up to me, who's over at Wellesley College. She's in the Alumni Association. She was looking for someone to do a performance for a concert for their procession that they have on their graduation weekend on Sunday morning. And I said, well, when is it? He says, it's the first Sunday in June. I said, okay. So she called me. She explained to me what they did. And they had a brass quintet playing there. They must have been paying them really good money for that. She says, but they don't do enough stuff it's a festive occasion, she said. Okay. So I said, okay. So I told her about the group. She goes, okay. She says, she's like, I believe what Henry told me. She says, and you sound like you know what you're talking about. So we settled on a price. Okay. First year we did it. And all we do is we set up our sound system to tie into theirs. And they have speakers all the way down the procession route. So the music starts when they start walking. And by the time they get there, and they have, like this year, because it's 25, they had the class of 25, the class of 20, the class of 15, the class of 10, all the way back to whoever's alive from whatever classes. And they're in no order whatsoever, which didn't help me. So that first year, we played all kinds of stuff, but mostly pop stuff, a lot of big band stuff. But even the Susan Marches and Dixieland, they loved it. She comes up to me. She says, Mike, this was really nice. She says, can you just plan on doing this every year? We started that in 1995. Henry says, you know when we started this? I says, no, 1995. He says, we've been doing this for 30 years. I says, oh, my God.
And speaking of which, I feel like you've kind of buried the lead here in that the homework that I did, and I do homework for these, suggests to me that this is the 50th anniversary of the founding of that group.
It would be, because we were playing as a group, let's see, 1971, 72, like 73, 74. But officially, we didn't start using the name until probably 74, 75. Tom came up with it. And I said to him, I says, you want that long a name for like a quintet or whatever it was? And then he came up with a thing, and he knew one of the printers because Tom was involved with the Bicentennial Committee in East Bridgewater. It was Badger Print at the time. They don't exist anymore. So he had a thing where they found an old wood cutting, these people playing cornets and sagbutts and horses, and for the front and the Bridgewater and stuff. And the funniest thing was he had like 20 of them printed up. It was half of an 8.5 by 11, you fold in half. And I look and I says, Tom, I says, you know, on the wood cutting, the horses have crapped in the street that's showing crap. And he just said, oh my God. I says, don't worry about it. Keep it. This is good.
Let people wonder.
Let them call me up. Hey, you know, there's horse on your flyer? No, there isn't.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Hey, I don't mind the fun. I don't care. There are stories I shouldn't tell you on this that we've done.
You've talked about former students and keeping in touch and that sort of thing. And my couple of experiences, I was going to say sitting in, but we were on the move, marching in with your band for a couple of parades, I took note of the fact that the demographic of the band was all over the place. You had all the generations there. Thinking about it from the angle of Tom Reynolds is involved. Now, a lot of my listenership, maybe not everybody, but a lot of folks who listen to this podcast will recognize the name from Tom's involvement with the Massachusetts Music Educators Association. He's one of those names that you kind of have to know. You almost can't help not knowing it.
Dr. Reynolds.
Yes, indeed. And one of the things that he has been involved with that I did know about was that he directed the concert band at MIT. Yep. And as I overheard conversations while we were standing for a little while waiting for the parade to step off this past one, I was listening and realizing, oh, that's a lot of MIT students, is it not? Has MIT been a connection for that group?
I think we had 3 of them at the parade.
Has that been kind of a long-standing thing where MIT folks come on over?
There's, do you know John Schmidt?
I do not, but that may not be his fault.
He lives in Harvard. He teaches in Auburn, I think, now. He went to UMass, but Tommy had him. Plus, he got to know him because he was teaching in Harvard. He had as a high school student, and then he went to UMass. And Tommy, I don't know whether he was his overseer for his student teaching, because the last 4 or 5 years up until he stopped this last year, he was doing that up at UMass. In fact, he got his doctorate up there. John, he's an excellent musician, but he ended up going and playing in the MIT band, and he's very versatile because he did music ed up at UMass. He was doing parades with us. His father would come and he'd drive the van sometimes when we had the van and parade and whatnot. Hopefully, as Tom starts to gradually start doing less with MIT at some point, John's teaching there, so we've got still at least one connection that's there. But yeah, I've had a lot of MIT students. A lot of the people in that band, not the other concert band that Tom doesn't do, they are grad students working on, if not their masters, their doctorates.
Oh, wow.
And way back, there was a bunch of them. I said, what the hell's going on? They were all chemistry majors, so they're all getting their doctorates in chemistry. Almost all of them were from outside of New England, in other words, Midwest, West. So typical band kids. Yeah. So that's why they'd do the parades. To them, a parade was a lot of fun, because they did it in school in 150 piece marching band and stuff like that. So, and a few of them stayed up here in New England. They've been working in New England ever since they got out of school. It's just, but that's nice. It's like an extended family.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I know more about this group that I parachute dropped into with my little saxophone. There's a whole lot more going on with this band that the people on the side of the road will never know just seeing the red vests go by. This has been really interesting.
But it's been fun. That's the point.
So, quick pause here. We could go to the last few questions and then do the big outro and wrap up. We're in great shape. Oh, look at that. Ooh. All right. So, here they come. And I've had people give like 3-word answers to these, or I've had whole paragraphs. Does not matter.
I won't draw any pictures.
And a couple people asked me, have you ever considered doing a video podcast? I said, not on your life. I am reluctant to suggest that there may be an end to this conversation because, as I suspect, it has been such a good time. But let me make sure not to miss the opportunity to ask a little set of band questions, which always produce interesting answers. And sometimes I've gotten the same answers from different people, but for different reasons. And that's a fun thing as well. The first question I always ask is, what's one of your favorite pieces of band music that you've played or conducted, I suppose?
I've enjoyed transcriptions of classical pieces, particularly the overtures and the ones that I've ended up transcribing for us to do from what our concert band arrangements. The one from Turandot. What's Pavarotti's the biggest one?
I was going to say the one that Pavarotti sang.
Nessun Dorma. One of the reasons is my dad he was a Dixieland guy, so he loved listening to Dixieland. But of course, we grew up as kids with all the old Italian records and stuff, and singers and whatnot. So Frank Sinatra, anything like that. And so we got to hear, bands and orchestras. But he got into opera, and whatever he did and he got into listening stuff, he went right in. And of course, Pavarotti had been out there for a few years before he did that. So once he heard him, they got very lucky. They got to go to Italy once, and they went to La Scala to see one of the operas there. They were a little disappointed because it wasn't all big names singing. These all the people that he's been listening to their records for years, and he says they got some hacks.
Understudies, come on.
It was, of course, my mother didn't care. She just got a big kick out of it. And so he loved it. And anytime if we were over there, if they had any music on, he'd have one of the Pavarotti records on, and I'd hear Nessun Dorma. So when I finally found, in fact, it was a British brass band arrangement that I ended up with. We don't do it as a performance. I played it with the Roma band because they'd have a singer once in a while, and they did a few of the opera pieces, and they'd have a soprano and a tenor. And one of them was Nessun Dorma. So their arrangement was just, it wasn't something I would have used to have someone sing, but it was fun to do.
I'll go the other direction. Is there a piece of band music that you've never played but you would like to?
Well, any of the Copland stuff, aside from the fanfare. Mm-hmm. By the way, he wrote 2 fanfares. Bob King. This when we were talking about the bicentennial, we're talking about, Bob says, he says, because you already got the Copland fanfare. But yeah, and we had good trumpet players in the horn section that could do that one time way back then. He says, you're aware he wrote another one? I says, no. I says, just for brass? He goes, yeah. He showed it to me. I wrote it down. I says, next time I'm ordering music, I'll order it. What different? But it's Copland, and it's actually a nice piece, but it's very different from the fanfare for the common man. But I've been listening to Copland, even when I was at Northeastern. There was a fellow who gave a music course at Northeastern called Louis Snyder, and he did it as music as an expression of mankind. It was a class that was in the auditorium because it would be full, and of course all the football players and stuff would be in there because it was an easy one. You listen to music, and I had never listened to Eddie Copland, and he played the theme from Our Town, from Grover's Corners. And I heard that, and I liked that. I liked the voicings and stuff. And after that, I went looking for Aaron Copland stuff to play. I mean, even to listen to. And so I always enjoyed all the Aaron Copland stuff.
Is there a band that you would like to perform with that you haven't, either because you're not the right age or you're not in the right place in the world or don't live in the right time period?
Not at this point, no. I never wanted to be traveling, and I've known people who've done it, and they've done it in a short time, and they said, I did it, that's it, I'm glad I tried it. Yeah. People doing cruise ships, there are people who love that, but they do it. I had a couple of them, they've done one cruise, and that was it.
Last but absolutely not least, do you have a favorite band story you like to tell?
We had a pit orchestra playing for Cabaret, and they had set up the stage where you had the main stage, a runway that came out, and then a runway that went across. So it was like a big H, and we were in one of the H's. And for some reason, couldn't get another trumpet player. I had trouble getting me because I ended up getting a trombone player and the rest of the people. During the performance, they had the scene where the MC is dancing with a gorilla. And I remember from the rehearsals, we would hear her counting. It was a girl that was in the costume, and she'd always be counting her steps. And I know why. The first night we're playing, and I had a guy playing tenor sax playing one of the trumpet players. He's sitting next to me, and all of a sudden we hear her count, and then we hear her go, "Uh-oh!" And next thing you know, she's on top of us. So she moves that. So the guy's name is Bob. I said, Bob, you ready? 1, 2, 3. We pushed her up. So the audience saw her fall in and then come flying up back on the stage. And I look over at him, and he's looking at me, and his neck was bent down. Oh. So he was off for that night.
And yet again, a story that happens nowhere else.
No.
Conductor, trombonist, trumpeter, euphonist, now I know this, Mike Palmieri, thanks so much for offering a bit of your time and a piece of your mind, and I will look forward to the next brass band gig that desperately needs a saxophonist.
Okay. Hey, Rob, thank you. I enjoyed this. We'll have to get together some other time just to talk.
I will look forward to that. Okay, we'll take a break. See, I told you, personality. We'll take a break, and then I'm going to talk after the break a little bit about marketing. Yeah, that's next. This is BandWagon. Here comes the dogfight. This episode's Dogfight is devoted to the Summer Band Director Professional Development event, which I have attended at least a dozen times, even in years in which I was not myself holding down a band director job. It's that much of a good time. Next week, band directors from New Hampshire and the surrounding New England states will again gather in southern New Hampshire for this year's New England Band Directors Institute. NEBDI was founded in 1992 by the New Hampshire Band Directors Association and took place for a great deal of that time, at least pre-COVID, at Plymouth State University in central New Hampshire. This summer will be the third time since the COVID pandemic that this three-day get-together will take place at Keene State University. It's dedicated to music education at all levels. It includes reading sessions of newly published music for band, grades 1 through 5, and for jazz ensemble. And each summer, the Institute includes a featured band composer in residence right there amongst us. Those have included Anthony Maiello, David Holsinger, Robert Sheldon, Michael Markowski, and last year, Randall Standridge. And if you don't think that was a good time, oh, trust me, it was. As a bonus, it's New Hampshire in the summer, and the scenery cannot be beat. In past years, I've packed up my travel toothbrush and my tenor sax and happily marinated in all things band for most of 3 days. This year, next week, I'll bring all those things again, but this time I'll also bring materials that I'll need in order to be a glitzy-looking exhibitor, singing what praises I can of this little podcast project. I've never been a conference exhibitor before, at least not in the service of a musical project. In a very distant past life, I was among the delegation from a local science technical journal who traveled to the annual International Microwave Engineering Conference and Exhibition in Dallas, Texas. I spent 4 days and 3 fabulous nights there, and happily, during the ferociously warm business hours, I was inside helping man the Microwave Journal exhibition booth in the convention center near Reunion Arena, blissfully air-conditioned, trying to force passing electrical engineers to make eye contact so that we could fill their souvenir bags with lots of pamphlets and trinkets and otherwise get them to acknowledge our magazine's existence and maybe remember it when they got home. I wasn't sure whether I wanted that to be how I made my living, but by the end of that half a week, I got pretty good at not taking, no thanks, personally. So next week, in Keene, New Hampshire, I will have less in the way of BandWagon branded keychains or t-shirts to give out, but I will be playing clips from various trio section interviews, and I'll be displaying a QR code that will take people straight to heyband.podbean.com and to the TeePublic merch site. It's definitely cheaper than lugging boxes of shirts up there. Maybe I'll get myself a few new listeners. Maybe those new listeners will get me a few more listeners as well. Maybe I'll even score an interview or 2 or 3. Let's see if I can manufacture a return on this relatively small investment. Okay, one last pause to catch breath, and then we'll wrap things up for this episode. Thanks for continuing to listen. To wrap up this week, let's take the CODA. For the CODA, as long as I'm thinking about the New England Band Directors Institute here, I figure I should tell you a story about its creator. Keene State University professor John Hart, now shepherds NEBDI, and before the COVID thing happened, my trio section guest from some time ago, Mark Stickney, was at the helm. But it all started in 1992 and was spearheaded by a fellow from Iowa. 7 years ago, I wrote about him in my little online blog, and here, only lightly edited, is that remembrance. In no way should the very tall, balding, bearded, bespectacled gentleman have needed to do what he did. But he did. And it told me a lot about who he was before I even saw him in context. I stood at the registration table for the weekend event and noted that my housing assignment appeared to be screwed up. This was long enough ago that I really don't remember exactly what the issue was, only that suddenly attending an event that would last from Thursday morning to Saturday noon was looking a little more dicey, since one does prefer to spend evenings in some form of lodging rather than, say, not. The tall gentleman happened to be standing very near the registration table, which made it easier for him to detect the waves of, that were coming off me. In that moment, in addition to staring down the barrel of 2 nights without an assigned place to sleep, I was the following things. 1. A newbie at that weekend event. 2. Recognizing exactly 0 other people attending that event. Well, not recognizing anyone yet, as it happened, but in that moment it was the first day of preschool all over again. And 3. I was not even a resident of the state in which I stood swaying gently. I was far from home. Upon inquiring about my predicament, the tall gentleman looked me up and down and said, Well, come on upstairs." I trailed along after him with all my baggage, and you can interpret that however you like, as he ascended a set of stairs and headed down a couple of hallways to a small office. One short and amiable phone conversation with someone later, he had set things right by setting me up with a proper dorm room assignment, and my long weekend was off and running. Half an hour removed from that little episode, I had a moment to muse that the tall gentleman could easily have passed that duty off to one of his lieutenants. I mean, I was a newbie from a whole different state with an issue that quite honestly was probably very small, considering all the other responsibilities he had, considering he was the fellow in charge of the entire event. But he saw a moment where he could be helpful to someone, knew what needed to be done, and determined that he was in the best position to do it, regardless of rank or station. Likely because of rank and station in this case, but still. And so, for the next 10 summers after that, I made my way north to Plymouth State University for the New England Band Directors Institute, secure in the knowledge that the event, dreamed up by the tall gentleman and put together by the New Hampshire Band Directors Association that he led, was an event during which all the attendees were viewed as valuable and important, and were taken care of, and were almost instantly seen as old friends, even the new ones. A mentor of mine once suggested that a band is a reflection of its leadership, and NEBDI was assuredly a reflection of its leader, Plymouth State University's Director of Bands, Professor Gary Corcoran. At an NEBDI edition a few summers after my housing assignment rescue moment, I took time to thank Gary again for his above-and-beyond effort, and he responded exactly true to form. In so many warm and unassuming words, he said, "You're welcome, and don't mention it, and anyone would have done it, and glad it worked out, and you're welcome." It was almost as if all of us faithful NEBDI attendees were his kids, and he made sure to take care of us. In many ways. For example, when he was addressing the group of attendees, he very often sounded like a gentle father figure, and then he would get a tiny mischievous glint in his eye while he was announcing the Friday evening attendees' party at a tavern down the road and calling it the Attitude Adjustment Session. In the summer of 2015, Gary had retired, but still was hanging around the summer workshop event, at least partly because the New Hampshire Band Directors Association Board had determined that they should award Gary their equivalent of the Lifetime Achievement Award. He'd been at PSU for an amount of time that, rounded to the nearest whole number, was approximately forever. In that time, he had, amongst other things, built NEBDI up into an event that was known nationwide as a unique professional development conference for school band directors. At the Friday evening dinner, which preceded the Attitude Adjustment Session, the association formally honored its longtime leader. When he was summoned to make a little speech, Gary got through a few appreciative sentences before choking up just a little. And when he finished his remarks, the resulting standing ovation lasted long enough that he sheepishly tried to get us to sit down, and tried again, and again. We just wouldn't. He was clearly not comfortable with the idea that he was getting this ridiculous, protracted standing O, but we figured he had it coming. Gary Corcoran passed away on Friday, July 6th, 2018, at the age of 74. I'm pleased that on several occasions I took advantage of the opportunity to make sure he knew how much I appreciated his work, both in the larger, sweeping lifetime achievement sense and also in the rescue a rookie from his own administrative incompetence sense. And every time I took advantage of that opportunity, I couldn't help but notice that although he only ever saw me 3 days a summer, so a total of 27 times ever, he always knew exactly who I was, no reintroduction necessary, and always seemed a little startled that anybody thought he was a big deal. He was a big deal. And I hope the New England Band Directors Institute continues for as many more summers as is humanly possible, if only to stand as testimony to how big a deal Gary Corcoran really was. And that's a wrap for this episode of BandWagon. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at the pod's website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback, let me know what you like or what you think might change. You can do that using the email address heybandwagon@yahoo.com, or leave a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that I do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast, unless you say otherwise. Those contact links and links to this episode's news items, conversation topics, and my interview guest, Mike Palmieri, can be found in our show notes, as can a link to BandWagon's merch store, thanks to the good folks at TeePublic. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, please do share it in the direction of someone whom you think might not be a listener yet. Word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with the podcast, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again mid-July. I'm Rob Hammerton. Keene State, here I come.